all of you, and thank you all so much for joining me here today for my National Day message. This is a truly historic occasion for me, as it is my very first National Day message to all of you. And I do hope that the message not just inspires you, but also makes you sit back and reflect just for a moment. For me, work began right after the general elections, which took place less than a month ago. When I began working on what I wanted to share with all of you, I went through many of the messages which so many of you had sent me, reflections of the general elections, discussions, and the multiple chats with people from within Potong Pasir SMC and all around Singapore. Literally through hundreds of messages which came through on my social media platforms, WhatsApp messages, and Telegram, which you know I will always answer. In many ways, these are your reflections of Singapore, 55 years on. 55 years of nationhood, 55 years of nation building. The state of our country today, and also with one eye on the kind of country we wish to call our Singapore. These are not just my reflections, but these are your thoughts, your voices, people of you from all walks of life. Tomorrow, Singapore and Singaporeans will celebrate our 55th birthday, our 55th year of existence as an independent nation. The question which we have to ask ourselves is what we can do to ensure that Singapore remains the place which we call our home, a place where our views can be heard constantly and consistently, and not just once in 4 or 5 years during elections. A place which isn't about where our houses or flats are located in districts which we sometimes don't recognize over time, but a place which we will always continue to call our home. A place where any child, regardless of your race or your background, or even a minority like me, can dream and aim for the skies despite our very diverse backgrounds. A place where if we work hard enough, we know that someone, somewhere, will give us a fair chance based on our ability and not because of our personal connections or which schools we hail from. A place where we will be able to get fair treatment even if we are less able, because less able should never mean that we are unable. A place where we can continue to thrive regardless where we started from. A place where we can grow and rebuild ourselves when we need to, even if we are faced with difficulties at any point in our lives without any kind of stigma. Let's face it and let's accept that Singapore isn't the place that it was 55 years ago. Singapore isn't the place it was 5 years ago. Our city, our country, our home is constantly changing. And we need to preserve Singapore to be a place of hope and a place where there will always be opportunities aplenty for all of us, diverse individuals. When my father got on a train from his hometown in Klang, which is about 40 kilometers away from Kuala Lumpur, and left for Singapore in 1959 to join the police force, he saw a city which provided opportunity and hope. He left his old home behind and hoped to start one right here in Singapore, a place he believed he would find a life partner, raise his children, and watch his children raise his grandchildren. Make no mistake about it. The path was never easy. As a police officer, he literally battled gunmen in the rain, He saw death right in the eye multiple times just to help build a safe Singapore. He joined the police force right at the bottom as a constable, and over time rose through the ranks to become an inspector, and then on to become one of Singapore's top crime busters in the 1970s. Despite his humble background, where he was born into a family where clothes had to be shared, a family which did not have enough money to buy a coffin to ensure that his father, my grandfather, could rest in peace when he died, and had to make one from wooden planks. And despite such beginnings, he never once gave up the belief that if you work hard enough, if you believe in your ability, you will someday climb up the opportunity ladder and have the opportunities to excel in your lives, to build a better life for you and for your family. Luck plays a part, but hard work and industry will always be critical. But sometimes luck and hard work isn't enough when there are policies and bias which hamper development of every individual. Our country, Singapore, was born with the basic tenets of meritocracy 55 years ago. Regardless of race, language, or religion, to build a democratic society based on justice and equality. This is what we recite religiously from the time we enter school. But is this what we practice? And how fiercely do we protect these? That someone whom many, and not just me, believe should be Singapore's next Prime Minister is denied that opportunity because of his race is somewhat problematic for us as a country. Just like how we still engage in social engineering and ethnic quotas in public housing estates. Imagine the anguish an educator, a teacher, needs to overcome when he or she needs to explain this to a young child who just took a pledge to build Singapore into a democratic society based on justice and equality, regardless of race, language, or religion. And how does she or she, the teacher, tell everyone in class that they too will be given equal opportunities in life, regardless of the color of their skin? Imagine what parents have to go through in trying to explain the same to their children, but then look up to the leadership and see that policies are race-based, which are contrary to the aspirations of our very own national pledge. How do we reconcile with that? And what kind of signals do we send everyone else? Our start point must be that every Singaporean is a star, regardless of your backgrounds and regardless of your races. And we must be able to develop every single Singaporean, regardless of your backgrounds or where you come from. Lee Kuan Yew himself said in 1965 that Singapore was not a Malay nation, not a Chinese nation, not an Indian nation, and that everybody would have a place right here in Singapore. That's the Singapore built by our parents and grandparents. And we must stay true to those ideals. Race aside, let's also recognize that discrimination also exists in so many other areas within our society. There are Singaporeans who are still being discriminated based on age, gender, and their sexual orientation. And we must never close our eyes to any kind of discrimination. If there is anyone who feels discriminated against, it becomes our duty to ask ourselves if we can do better to protect them all. A government has the moral authority, not just the political authority, but the moral authority to protect the weakest in society. Let's accept that despite arguing to the contrary, there are LGBTQs who still feel discriminated against, whether at work or in public. How many of you would actually not let someone's sexual orientation influence your behaviors, or your interactions with them. And if you are an employer or someone in human resource, how many of us can actually say that we have given equal opportunities regardless of their sexual orientation? If we are to build a diverse Singapore where there's truly opportunities for all, then we must open our eyes a little bit more to our attitudes towards people who are different from us and accept that we can do so much more for them, and to ensure that they lead as normal a life as possible, that we still insist on a retirement age is also somewhat discriminatory. Why must there be a retirement age when age doesn't seem to be an issue with the makeup of our cabinet, where there are members who are above the ages of 62? Do they get their contracts renewed annually as well, with new re-employment terms? If we are to build a Singapore which respects older workers, then we need to do away with rules which are ageist and discriminatory towards our older workers. Let's give our workers the opportunity to keep working as long as they deem it is fit and as long as they are willing, so that they can retire when they choose to and live comfortably once they do. We also need to do a lot more to protect our Singaporean workers and ensure that they are given the opportunities they need. Our workers need to be given fair opportunities, and the fair consideration framework hasn't been fair enough to Singaporeans. We need to look at legislation to ensure that Singaporeans are given the opportunities they need in roles, and companies which continue to flout rules on fair employment practices need to be identified, named, and taken to task. Enough of talk, action instead. These are the kind of conversations which we need to have and continue having, and recognize that there are many ways to ensure that everyone needs an opportunity to lead a livable and happy life. Not every discussion or difference in opinion which we have needs to descend into some kind of online chaos. Just like the argument on what constitutes a livable or a minimum wage for every human being, against the backdrop of rising costs of living in Singapore. Minimum wage or livable wage, the question to ask ourselves is, how would we feel if the person who was earning such wages was our mother, our father, or our grandparents for that matter? How would we then react? Different people will frame issues differently, depending on whom you speak to. But that some of our seniors continue to work in low-paying roles despite their ages and earn paltry salaries after 55 years of our existence and boasting of being one of the wealthiest countries in the world is rather diabolical, worrying, and sad. We may not agree on everything, which is not entirely a bad thing at all, but everyone deserves a decent wage which helps them lead a decent and dignified life. The environment in which our seniors grow old must be one where they feel the ability to continue to contribute to society and to live comfortably when they choose to retire. That is what we truly call a progressive and inclusive Singapore. That is what it looks like. And talking about the environment, let's endeavor to pay more respect to our green spaces and our natural reserves. As a responsible Singapore, we have to aim towards making environmental impact assessments mandatory for all developmental projects and consider the public's voices in the process. Sometimes moving fastest may not be the best option, and we must recognize that more and more Singaporeans wish to have a say in the way the country, their common spaces are being developed. All of you have a stake in the green lungs of Singapore too. Why do we spend our time and money on making pledges to protect our green spaces, but then not respect the little green spaces labeled as nature reserves in the same breath? Why do we pledge to plant 1 million trees and aim to turn Singapore into a city in nature, but allow that the Cross Island Line is going to cut directly under the Central Catchment Reserve, our biggest wild space that's teeming with unique local biodiversity? Aren't the wildlife in there as important as well? No, not just in issues involving race and religion and gender equality. There are passionate Singaporeans who also wish to have their voices heard when it comes to issues involving nature, wildlife, and animal welfare. Also as critical for our country is the need in preparing our children with the resources and the know-how to get ready for the future. More and more, we need to ask ourselves if our education system is equipped to take our children into their future. The government has been committed to education reform to ensure that our children are equipped for the future, and that is great, because the future will always remain uncertain. But what our Singaporean young parents are concerned about is the speed of education reform. For example, it was announced in March 2019 that Singapore students would have seen the last of the O and N-level exams. But this will only take effect in 2027 with the introduction of new national exams. We need to study the speed of the reform, because by the time the impact of the reform kicks in after 2027, we may still be lagging behind. And let's not forget that every day of delay means that some child who will be affected by our current system, which we already have concluded is in need of reform. Education aside, are we prepared to provide our children with the kind of jobs which they will need to help them excel, help them grow, and help them prosper? Are we ready for the future, or are we still stuck in the past? The MSCI Index, which is the Morgan Stanley Capital International Country Index, which is the benchmark for measuring performances of leading companies in the stock market, will show that 50% of the MSCI Singapore is concentrated in financials and more than 22% in real estate. Only 2% is in IT. Compare this to South Korea, the benchmark for a developed high-tech Asia economy, where 50% of the MSCI index there is in IT, while the rest are well diversified across various other sectors. It is a lot more different with China, where you will see the likes of Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan leading the charge. There is also an expectation among the experts in the financial sector that in time to come, China will be a leading financial hub as it opens up its financial sector further, giving global banks more autonomy over its shareholding structure and build up of the Greater Bay Area, which will further enhance the integration of the Hong Kong financial hub with China. What this clearly means for us is that we need to develop far beyond the financial sector, and there is a need to bring in investments to set up high-tech drug manufacturing, clean energy investments like production of electric vehicles or EV components, and high-tech firms that can ride the next wave of industrial revolution, building up smart cities through the Internet of Things and 5G. Our SMEs, the engine room of our economy, is also guaranteed to face headwinds, but this is not just due to COVID-19. In as early as 2017, a UOB report had stated that its analysis of SGX-related SMEs revealed that a number of companies in the red had overtaken the 2008 global financial crisis levels, with the largest percentage of losses in shipping, oil and gas, materials, construction, and consumer discretionary sectors. COVID-19 will have made it worse, and we will expect that more people will lose their jobs and face difficulties. The pressures of living in Singapore, one of the most costliest cities in the world, if not the most costliest, will only extend the financial pressures faced by many. And we can expect that there will be social stresses. that suicide is the leading cause of death for those who are aged between the ages of 10 and 29 is very troubling. According to latest statistics revealed by the Samaritans of Singapore, 71 people between the ages of 20 to 29 ended their lives in 2019. These are our youth, our potential future leaders. That they choose to end their lives only means that we need to do a lot better, to really do some soul searching, to ask how we can do a lot better as a people, to give our youth hope instead of having them feel that death is the only resort. This is why we need to step up our mental health wellness regime and to make it a fundamental part of how we look after the needs of our citizens. Providing mental health wellness scans for our frontliners especially, our healthcare staff, after months of battling COVID-19 is also absolutely essential, as with our foreign workers who have been stuck in isolation and in dormitories for months. We need to remove the stigma surrounding mental health wellness and give due recognition to its importance in a modern Singapore. We need to keep our eyes on the ball and raise questions when we feel that something isn't right, or if we feel that something can be done differently and better. Not just me, but all of you as well. Remember that you have a voice, and your voice needs to be heard. A far more educated population only means that we have the power to query, and the people in charge have a duty and a responsibility to answer. This is a time for us, regardless of which generation you belong to. This is a time for us to learn to fly and to learn to soar, to find our inner voices and to use our voices for the power of good. We will never be able to know what the future holds, but what we can do is to take ownership of our country, our Singapore, through the decisions which we make today and tomorrow. You have the power to decide the kind of Singapore we build together through your actions and through your passionate voices. The road ahead will be tough, and it is through tough times that we become resilient as a people. The road ahead will put hurdles in front of all of us, which we need to come and overcome together. Only if we stand together will we be able to overcome these hurdles. We may have political differences or difference in ideas, but what constitutes a gracious Singapore is that we work together and work together well, because we are one Singapore, regardless of where we come from. We have come so far together as a country, as one people, as one nation, as one Singapore. And in a post-COVID-19 world, it is critical that we continue to work together, look after our neighbors, look after our friends who may be hard hit. Work harder together to find the inner strength to make Singapore a better place than what it is today, than what it was yesterday, as we continue to inch towards the future. You can make the difference in the lives of others around you. You have a part to play in the kind of Singapore you want to leave behind for your children. You have the power to build a far more equitable and far more just society, regardless of race, language, and religion, for all of us, because every Singaporean is a star. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen in. And here's wishing all of you, my fellow Singaporeans, a happy National Day and Majulah Singapura.